This episode is brought to you by Audi. The road is calling. Embrace the thrill of the drive with the all-new, fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron. Featuring effortless power, serious acceleration, and advanced Audi tech. It's not just a new EV. It's a new way to experience driving. The all-new, fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron is here. The next chapter of Audi starts now.
At T-Mobile, our critical mission is providing unparalleled 5G coverage for when connectivity is mission critical. Introducing T-Priority, America's best 5G network experience for first responders, even in times of congestion. More capacity, faster speeds, better coverage. T-Priority from T-Mobile, built for tomorrow's emergencies, ready today. Discover more at t-priority.com.
For qualifying organizations on eligible rate plans, coverage not available in some areas and may be impacted by emergencies.
I'm Ross Kenyon. I'm the host of the Reversing Climate Change podcast. I'm a longtime climate tech and carbon removal entrepreneur, and this is a very important episode. I have an alumnus of the show on today. Grant Faber was the Direct Air Capture Hub's program manager at the U.S. Department of Energy until very recently when he was let go as part of the mass firing of probationary employees in the federal government. Grant walks us through what this process has been like for him. And I think it's a really important episode because of how little time there is to deal with climate change, how much time we're likely to lose in scaling carbon removal during an unsupportive policy period. We just don't have a lot of time to lose right now. And for those objective climate outcomes that we need, this is bad news. But moreover, we talk about the method in which this has been carried out, and it's frankly disturbing. We discuss it in the show. I typically am not someone who gets rattled, perhaps nearly as much as I maybe should, by changes in politics. I tend to see a lot of continuity rather than discontinuity in changes in administration, especially in the US. So that being said, I do not feel that way right now. I am deeply concerned, to put it lightly, from various directions. I'm more concerned than average. I'm angrier than average. And I'm more despondent than average with the direction that the country has been going. My friends at the CDR Policy Scoop have a show that's coming out tomorrow, Tuesday, February 25th. The link will be in the show notes once it's published, and you should absolutely check out that show. It's with Noah Deitch, and that's going to be a really important one to listen to as well. I'd love to hear Noah's story that I'm sure is parallel in some ways to Grant's, but also different in other ways. And I think it's a really important time to be listening to people who are actually working in government and what their experience has been like. So I won't say enjoy the show, even though Grant and I do have fun and it starts off a little bit fun, but we're also dealing with really serious subject matter. We're concerned about the state of the country and its direction, and are not feeling super hopeful right now about the United States of America, nor carbon removal and its ongoing growth and development. So thank you for listening. And then just briefly, if you love the show, if you could please become a paid subscriber, it's $5 a month. It really helps me keep publishing these and making it worthwhile to do so. So if you could please become a paid subscriber, it's $5 a month, not a ton of money. The link is at the top of the show notes. Thank you so much for being a supporter. Really appreciate you. Here's your show. I'm gonna have to fumigate or something, Grant. I can't keep you off of this podcast.
Yeah.
Kind of Grant infestation here. Thanks for coming back. Starting with a joke, but I'm really sorry to hear of what happened at the Department of Energy and your role. And I think I speak for everyone in CDR when I say how disappointing these moves have been. And I'm really sorry this happened to you.
Oh, thank you, Ross. Yeah, it means a lot. And yeah, I've been humbled and honored by all the people reaching out to me, offering support in this time. It's definitely, very frustrating. And could very well be a big setback for carbon removal and other efforts across the federal government for everyone who was laid off. So Yeah, it's tough, but there is a great team of folks still in place, at among national labs and in different parts of DOE who I hope will be able to carry the mission forward to some extent. But it's difficult to say how many reductions in force and other measures like that will be coming down the line. So
seems like such a loss to me because I don't know exactly how it works with government salaries. I imagine one could probably look it up if one were very determined, but you probably could have made more money working in the private sector. You're very well known. People respect you. I think you probably could be employed quickly and at a higher rate than the government would pay you. And you're a very thoughtful, meticulous person. This just seems, why shed you? There's no non-flattering way to say it. It just seems like a loss for the entire organization to lose you and people like you.
Oh, for sure. And, I did take a substantial pay cut relative to my previous consulting work to go work at DOE. But for me, it was, totally worth it because I frankly loved the work. It was definitely a little bumpy at first, just adjusting to, being on my own doing the consulting to being part of one of the biggest bureaucracies in the planet. So it was an adjustment. It was a little bumpy at times, but I just came to absolutely love the work. The team at Office of Fossil Energy Carbon Management and the National Energy Technology Lab that I had the great fortune of working with were just some of the, I thought, the top leading experts in the world on all things DAC and carbon removal. And so it was just such an honor to work there and being able to wake up every day and think at that ecosystem level, think super strategically and think, okay, how are we going to do this in a way that benefits most Americans? Because, obviously we're responsible to Congress, which is in turn responsible to their constituents across the country. To be able to think at that level and to do that work, it was certainly an honor. So I loved it. I would have stayed, for as long as I could have had I not been laid off. But it's sad, these layoffs are impacting folks across the federal government, and they're hitting vital services at places like the VA, the CDC, the FDA, the FAA, and the list goes on and on and on. And they just came through with a cudgel just saying, okay, anyone who's probationary, which, we affectionately call probies, all probies are gone, just because it's relatively easier to lay them off. They have fewer protections, fewer appeal rights, less of a need for notifications beforehand. So, it's very sad, and I don't personally think it will actually accomplish their mission really of saving much money, because less than 10% of federal spending is on a compensation for federal employees, and they're probably realistically only going to be able to get rid of 10%, maybe 20% in a vicious scenario of those employees. So we're talking very small percentages of savings that would actually be generated, but there will certainly be a disproportionate impact on the services that these agencies provide to Americans from these layoff events. So very difficult times. There are veterans, people with disabilities, people with mortgages, people with kids being just put on the street unnecessarily. So it's a very sad time for sure.
If it's less about the direct monetary, budgetary, fiscal effects of labor cuts, what is it actually about?
I think it's about a lot of things. I think obviously it's about politics and signaling. This misguided Department of Government Efficiency is coming through, and they want to show results, I think, early on in the Trump administration to say, hey, look at this headcount we cut. Hey, look at this budget. And some of the values could seem somewhat large on paper, like, oh, we cut, $10 billion worth of, compensation or whatever. And maybe they conveniently ignore the value of services to Americans that are lost, or they, ignore other inefficiencies that will be created as a result of this. But they can just parade those absolute numbers around and make it seem like, hey, we're making massive and rapid progress. We're being responsible. We're we're keeping our campaign promises in these things. So I think it's about politics. I also think it's about a broader desire among some ultra-conservative groups to dismantle the federal bureaucracy. And I think there's different drivers of the urge to do so. One of which is to reduce any kind of federal expenditures to ultimately pass the so-called savings onto corporate and billionaire cronies in the form of tax cuts and lower taxes. So, I think that's a part of it. I think they want to hold up what they view as the administrative state because they think it holds back progress of some of their favored interests. So That's a part of it. I think, there is a false vision that folks throughout the bureaucracy are like ultra woke DEI liberal people, and I can say that's certainly not the case. I mean, most people I worked with were just regular Americans from all walks of life, who really truly do just get up every single day and who could make more money in the private sector but choose public service. They're not trying to leech off the system or anything like that. But there's this perception that, they're just these ultra liberal deep state folks, and so they just want to come through with that hacksaw and just get them out of there. So I think there are different reasons. They're all kind of related to one another, but the outcome of this, I do not see any world in which this is going to be positive for the well-being of most Americans.
Grant, let's take this chronologically and go back to how you got involved, what you worked on at DOE, and maybe, insofar as you can, explain how this process went down with your termination. Are you willing to do that?
Oh, sure, yeah. So I can start at the end there and just say how it went down. it kind of started, I guess, with election night, and waiting to see the results come in. And, when you stayed up late, I was probably up until 2, 3 a.m. that night, just kind of watching things roll in. And it was like, okay, we kind of had a sense that Trump was going to have it there. And so I think when it started there, it was like, okay, we're kind of in for a lot. We need to spend the next few months like working on where we can, just in trying to ensure that we can get done what we can get done, before Trump comes in, before everything changes over. And so we had a couple of pretty wild months, I would say, just trying to do our work, and just try to make sure that things were in place, that everything was kind of set up properly so that, the transition would be smooth and hopefully we could protect our awardees. And then the changeover came, on January 20th. And I'd say the anxiety kind of, was ramping up through that date because we just didn't know what was going to happen. And immediately after that, all kind of top leadership was removed from the agency. And that's, conventional for any kind of administration changeover. And so then we had a bunch of acting folks, and there still are in many roles, some acting folks while you wait for Senate confirmations or other appointments. And, during that time, everything was frozen, and it was like bipartisan infrastructure law money was frozen, Inflation Reduction Act funding was frozen, and then other kinds of base appropriation spending, it was just freeze, everything's frozen. And again, not totally unexpected for an administration changeover. They want to freeze things and start, reevaluating priorities, but it was an aggressive freeze. It came quickly. And then there was a communications embargo. We weren't really able or allowed to meet with outside entities to communicate about things until we had new leadership in, new priorities in, and that also applied to our awardees. And so, I was the Direct Air Capture Hub's program manager, the Office of Carbon Management, and we had a bunch of DAC Hub projects that are under award that we're doing work that we met with on a fairly regular cadence to track their progress, to see what's going on, answer questions, and those kinds of things. And we just couldn't even hold those meetings. And so, there's just a lot of nerves, a lot of okay, where's this going to go? How long is the freeze going to last? And there were court orders flying back and forth, lawsuits, and there was just widespread confusion. What's going to fly? What can't fly? And then, I think it was about a week ago on Thursday, there was a Politico article and some other articles saying all probationary employees at DOE and other places will be terminated, by the end of the day. And so it's okay, I had started in April of 2024, and so I was in that boat along with many other folks hired on relatively recently as carbon removal work was ramping up at the agency. And I didn't get the email by 5 or 5:30, so I thought I was in the clear, and I had a very strange evening, feeling am I going to be one of the few, if any, probies who's left? And there was a really weird form of survivor's guilt that I was, feeling in advance of that, and I'm going to feel so bad if all these other people get terminated and I don't, but I want to hold on for as long as I can to do my duty. And if they want me out of here, then I, don't want to leave. It's I don't want to play into Elon Musk's, madness. But then, I woke up Friday morning to find myself locked out of everything. And then I had to get my termination letter sent to my personal email address, and it was just all over. They really just ripped the Band-Aid off, I guess, there. And so I wasn't, I guess, totally shocked. But I was definitely saddened by the broader situation. And as I said before, I mean, my heart goes out to all those who were terminated who, have a variety of circumstances that make their terminations a lot more of a difficult situation. And there's some dark times going on for everyone. So, I think that's a decent overview of those things. I will also note that there was a lot of anything related to community benefits planning, DEI, Justice 40. I mean, that stuff was completely censored, and just anyone involved with that, regardless in many cases of their probationary status, was just axed. Wow. Those people were put on leave and are just ultimately going to be fired. And ultimately, the censorship was kind of bad too. I mean, there was fear of using even the word diversity, or the phrase climate change or greenhouse gas or anything like that, just for fear that you would get tagged in some Control F, sweep. And so it was a little, dystopian, and that's definitely a problem for carbon removal or carbon dioxide. And, it's like in the name. So definitely some tough times.
Love, exciting and new. Hello, Hannah Waddingham here. Have you seen the fabulous new Sun Princess? World-class entertainment, exceptional dining, and the greatest pizza ever. It's alive.
Don't miss our Come Aboard sale with up to 40% off and free room upgrades. Visit princess.com or call your travel advisor to book. Princess Cruises. Terms and restrictions apply. Offer ends 2/28/25. Ships of Bermudan and British Registry.
Hey, Fidelity. What's it cost to invest with the Fidelity app?
Start with as little as $1 with no account fees or trade commissions on U.S. stocks and ETFs.
That's music to my ears.
I can only talk.
Investing involves risk, including risk of loss. Zero account fees apply to retail brokerage accounts only. Sell order assessment fee not included. A limited number of ETFs are subject to a transaction-based service fee of $100. See full list at fidelity.com/commissions. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC, member NYSE, SIPC.
When administrations change, as you note, it's common for leadership to change and new appointees to get approved by the Senate and go through that whole process here. And but once it's below that, I associate this with the late 1800s and civil service reform, where there used to be strong Tammany Hall type effects, where if you were elected, you got to, through patronage, invite all of your friends in, everyone's cousins that you owed a favor to. They would get their job in the various departments, and that was part of the spoils of winning a big election. And then that was done away with and is no longer the case. And granted, it's different. It's not quite like Tammany Hall. What happened here, it's not nearly as self-beneficial in this way, or maybe you would disagree with that. But I don't think we've seen this level of replacement or dismissal. Has there been something like that that I'm just not aware enough of how the administrative portion of the state operates to know? Or is this as uncommon as it seems to me?
So there is some reporting going around about under President Clinton, there being a termination of hundreds of thousands of federal employees. And I believe President Reagan had a similar kind of commission that was supposedly looking for waste, fraud, and abuse across the federal government, trying to eliminate it. I'm not overly familiar with either of those efforts, beyond that in Clinton's case, there was more congressional support and buy-in for that activity, which is, normally how these things are supposed to go. So, I mean, at DOE, government agencies, it's in their right to do a reduction in force. You can do widespread, layoffs, but the challenge is Congress has the power of the purse and is supposed to sign off on spending. They have control of that. And the administration has to comply with that. I mean, it's just part of how our system functions under the Constitution, that Congress determines, how much gets spent, how it should be spent, and then the executive comes in and implements that. And so, when you're talking about widespread reductions in force and layoffs, particularly, that can affect the rate at which those funds can be spent, or however much can be spent. I mean, there needs to be more widespread buy-in across the government, and there probably needs to be closer coordination with the unions as well, who have collective bargaining agreements that lay out very specific provisions and rules for when you go about doing these layoffs, kind of what you need to do in terms of giving folks notice, or perhaps having exceptions or other relevant considerations. So, now, of course, in my personal case as as a probationary employee, I didn't have as many of those protections. And what the Trump administration appears to be doing is they have kind of like a multi-step process for reducing the federal bureaucracy. The first step was the deferred resignation program, where they offered people this, what amounted to be, and for many still kind of is, a very shady offer to resign and be put on administrative leave, and you can still get paid through September. But yeah, there's all sorts of provisions, exceptions, and other kinds of unsavory aspects to that deal. And ultimately, many of the folks who took it were going to either retire anyway, seek other jobs anyway, or perhaps in some cases were folks with disabilities who were afraid of the return to office mandate and would not have been able to comply with that. So they preferred to take this and perhaps search for new work. Anyhow, that program got maybe 70 to 80,000 people who took it out of about, say, I think it's about 2.3 million federal employees. So that was kind of the first step. Got about 3% of the workforce was called or will be called through this program. And then the next step in this multi-step plan was, hey, let's get rid of the probationary employees because they have fewer protections, fewer appeals rights. Right now, there are lawsuits flying back and forth. It's uncertain how any of them will be resolved, if it's going to go to the Merit Review Board and, what the Merit Review Board's probably going to say. And of course, there's some executive influence over that. So we'll see how that turns out. But personally, I'm not holding my breath for anything like reinstatement or anything like that. I mean, from my perspective, it's over, but it is worth, exercising your procedural rights to dispute it. And so, then I would say that there's also other non-probationary folks being laid off through various means, and then who knows who's next. I think a lot of people expect widespread reductions in force and other kinds of means, the widespread return to office mandate, which for many folks is completely absurd given their line of work. And they may have to, even if they work for, say, the Department of Transportation, they might have to go be stationed at a VA, office or something because they just live in a different locale and can't move, but just need to report to work at a federal building. I think they're also just going to try to put people through a lot, vilify people, abuse people to drive them to voluntarily quit, and then also do widespread termination. So it's kind of a multi-step plan, I think, to drive out people from across the federal government.
Yeah, I saw the famous Vought quote that's making the rounds from the OEM about essentially traumatizing people, making their lives miserable in an effort to do reduction in force in a quasi-voluntary way. Which I don't know if there's more context to that makes that quote less unsavory, but I found it to be frankly ominous.
Certainly, yeah. And folks from places like the Heritage Foundation and other similar ultra-conservative groups, I mean, this in many cases is a multi-decade plan that they've had to, just reduce the size and scope and powers of what they view as the administrative state for their, ends. And it's scary, it's unfortunate. Many of these provisions are from Project 2025, which, are now coming to fruition. And so we'll see how far they're able to go. It's going to get increasingly difficult as they spend down their political capital, as approval ratings drop, as folks start to know other folks who were terminated or who were personally affected due to the terminations. And frankly, as Congress starts to get a little frustrated as their districts start to be impacted. But it's difficult because there are many people who are willing, whether, regular citizens or those in positions of political power who in some cases are willing to put aside their personal pain in favor of what they view as a broader political cause. And the kind of, cult-like adoration of Trump and Musk and those involved in their group is unfortunately, I think, going to drive a lot of pain forward. And I think, we could be heading for some very dark times.
One thing I hope for on that is, as you allude to, the famous first 100 days of any presidency is often the honeymoon period, and then reality sets in and things are disappointing in predictable ways. I've also been having hope for, surely you've seen the pictures and the videos of Elon standing and Trump sitting, and Elon dominating interviews and Trump almost being pushed into a corner. And I can't imagine that for a psyche like Trump's, they can't feel very good. And everyone interprets it as being somewhat humiliating that he's clearly not the alpha that he presupposes himself to be in that duo. And I'm hoping that tension, if people poke at it enough, maybe that tension will start to break some of this down. I don't think that could last for long with egos that big in the same room. I have some amount of hope in that. I don't know if that's naive or not, but I hope for it.
Yeah, I think folks have been predicting that ever since their quasi-friendship, partnership, whatever it is, began. That this
it's called a buddy in chief, by the way.
Yes, the buddy in chief, or the first buddy, or whatever. Yeah, I don't know how long it's going to last. I don't know how long it can last. We'll see, but as long as it does, I think we're in for some tough times. But yeah, even if it doesn't, I mean, you never know what stooge they bring in next. And that's kind of the concern with any appointee. It could be the case for anything. If we look to Trump's first administration or as precedent for that, it's like, hey, maybe an appointee gets in there who's actually not so bad for whatever issue you might care about, but that person could be gone in 3 months. And so, yeah, there's just no stability, no consistency, and it's just, we live in very volatile times.
Why didn't you take the voluntary buyout?
So, I mean, I think for a lot of people who received it was on their mind. And it's interesting because I've said this to several folks that I think there was almost a mob intimidation tactic that was being used in the deferred resignation email, because they sent us a bunch of different emails, but basically it was a threat. It was like a carrot and a stick. They were saying, like, if you take this, you can have the vacation of your dreams. You can get paid and just sit on your couch until September. How great will it be? Almost assuming that, yeah, federal employees are these lazy people who are just going to take that. But if you don't take this, you're just going to be terminated, laid off otherwise, or you're going to have to return to the office and all these things. And so in my mind, it was like Tony Soprano, threatening to break your legs if you don't do something, but offering you 10 grand if you do it. And so it just had an icky kind of tactic, and I was like, okay, yeah. And the fact that they want me to take this, they want me to buy into this, I was like, I don't want to, because they want me to, and frankly, I was like, even before I got the email, and I think many federal employees were in the same boat, before I got the email, I was thinking, like, how bad's this going to get? Should I get out now? Should I just go back to consulting or do some private sector thing, whatever? But when I got that email, it pissed me off. And there were follow-up emails to that saying things along the lines of, you should leave your lower productivity public sector job to go into a higher productivity private sector one. And that's an insult. I mean, that's a brutal insult. And so it just, for me, even though morale is, sinking across the entire federal government, for me personally, it was like, I'm going to get up and I'm going to work even harder. I don't care that I'm being vilified or abused. It's like, I'm going to hold on for as long as I can. And I have a duty to my team, to our awardees, to the carbon removal industry, and ultimately to the American people to, responsibly carry out the duties of my federal job. And maybe this all sounds way too grandiose or whatever. Maybe I was naive. There were also more tactical considerations of, are they even going to pay? Even if you took it, are they going to pay you? And I think there are cases I've read of folks who took it and then got fired anyway. And so it's like you kind of then had to give up your dignity, but then they just boot you out anyway. They just say, oh no, you're not eligible for that. Sorry, bye. And so it's just, and then there's broader concerns as well. There's, again, lawsuits flying about the viability of the program, but also Congress hasn't passed a budget yet. We're still on a continuing resolution for fiscal year 2025, and it's not clear how that's going to be paid for. And in some ways, the whole program may have been illegal and perhaps a violation of the Anti-Deficiency Act, which is essentially an act that says in a government agency, you can't spend more money than you've been given. And there can be criminal implications of doing so. So you need to be very conservative with that. But yeah, there was just so much uncertainty, distrust. And yeah, that's why I noted that from what I've heard and read, most of the folks who took it were either going to leave anyway or felt like their job was going to be so untenable that, hey, I might as well just take this because the expected value is positive, even if I don't necessarily expect to get anything out of it.
Wow. It's a bit quixotic, but I like quixotic in times like these. another tactical consideration, I imagine, is that if you vacate your role, they might fill it with someone whose ends are antithetical to the office, the chair, your role. And there's also a sense of protecting whatever you can for as long as you can, even if it means some very unpleasant working conditions.
Certainly. That was, another consideration, although as a potential counter to that, and I'm not certain about, this, but I did hear some rumors that for those who take the deferred resignation, that they may just eliminate those positions outright and not backfill them. And so, yes, you're definitely right that there may be some cases where they're trying to backfill with loyalists or stooges or other, kinds of henchmen, or they may be permanently eliminating those positions because that's kind of the cost, the supposed, cost cutting goal. And so they may not want to backfill it, or maybe, years before it gets backfilled. And, in my case, I tended to think that, hey, having someone at Office of Carbon Management looking at DAC hubs, that's probably something that is important. That's, I was hired on for a reason. I wouldn't have wanted, if those rumors were true, I would not have wanted to saddle all my, coworkers with that position being eliminated should I leave. And so that was definitely a concern as well. I didn't want to let down anyone I was, working with. So there were a lot of reasons, but yeah, the big one is I wanted to keep doing the work. I thought it was important. And in no way do I want any of this to be construed as, oh, I was trying to work against the Trump administration or something like that. I think when you're a civil servant, you need to honor the wishes and orders of the new administration as long as they're constitutional. I took, as all civil servants do, you take an oath to the Constitution when you start the job. And as a civil servant, particularly one with maybe some subject matter expertise, you kind of need to balance your oath to the Constitution, the need to follow orders and to honor the chain of command in the administration. You need to honor Congress's wishes because they also represent the people. And you need to honor your subject matter expertise and the knowledge and skills in your space. And that's kind of the fun, challenging, exciting, scary part of being a civil servant, is you need to balance all of those things. And so, yeah, I was trying to, but yeah, it just didn't, it just wasn't in the cards.
I know you as a careful person and careful with your words, and yet you use terms like stooge and henchman, which have very strong pejorative connotations here. What I'm trying to ask is, how bad do you think all of this actually is? Is it as nefarious as your word choice presupposes? Or can maybe people exhale a little bit? How do you feel?
It's a challenging question to answer because I am trying to balance myself, and maybe this relates to our last podcast episode, which if you haven't listened, listeners, you should go listen. But, especially the stuff about open-mindedness, I appreciate and respect those who have different opinions and perspectives than I do, but who approach it in good faith. But I think there's a lot of folks who are not doing that right now and are trying to achieve, in some cases, vicious political ends using beliefs that they don't really believe in. And so, yeah, I think there is a chance I could just be this disgruntled kind of, laid off person who's just, really angry and just wants to point fingers and, point blame and accuse. And maybe I'm just, some rabid person who's inhaling liberal media, 16 hours a day and just is angry and scared. But I do think there are objective, reality, or just there are truths, there are things that are happening that are deeply, deeply concerning, that are, I don't know if I would say unprecedented, but things that we haven't seen in a very, very long time. And there are major risks that we're running. And one of those is this flippant attitude about court orders and following what the court says. And, I've been thinking very seriously in the past couple of weeks about, man, it really is odd that we concentrate all military and law enforcement under one branch, under the executive branch. And it's how does that not result in this tyrannical situation where the Congress says one thing or the courts say one thing, but the executive branch just doesn't do it and just dares the other branches to enforce. And yeah, the only guard really against that is the goodwill of the individual and like individual people's oaths to the Constitution and to follow the laws that we've all kind of, that we all kind of implicitly agree to by living in this country. And the fact that we even have to think like that we have to ask these kinds of questions is terrifying. And it's really scary. And it could portend some very, I've probably said this 3 times already in this, in our show here, but it could portend dark times ahead. So I just think that the risks are really high, but I do think that it is very important to distinguish between things that are awful but lawful and things that are truly, violating the law and the Constitution and threatening the very fabric of our democracy. So I think both of those kinds of things are going on right now, and it behooves us to understand the difference between them and how we should collectively respond.
Very measured response. I think you are like me in this way that we are probably, let me know if you identify with this statement at all. I'm a very annoying silver lining finder. Things can be pretty bad politically, and I'll be like, I kind of like that thing, and that's okay. Are you like that, by the way? Are you able to find those sometimes? Or no? Yeah, okay.
Sometimes.
I haven't really had that luxury with Trump. And I find many of the things that you named to be extremely concerning. I respect a lot of the conservative tradition. I've done a lot of shows about the conservative intellectual tradition. I've learned a lot from conservatives too. Some of them are extremely well-read and smart and have interesting, counterintuitive things to add to the conversation. I think that tradition should play a role. And yet I watch what's happening now, and I don't see any similarity between many of those ideas and what's happening now. And I find some of the expressions of political power to be downright nauseating. The high water mark for me so far was the ASMR deportation video. I think that might be...
Oh, wow.
do you know about that? Have you seen it?
No.
There was an officially released video that had sort of ASMR. If you're listening, you don't know. It's a common YouTube thing where you'll put on headphones and it'll have, some people like to hear the sounds of at a barber shop, and that's a relaxing set of sounds. And the Trump administration put out a video for the soothing sounds of deporting undocumented immigrants, and I find it to be entirely inappropriate, not funny. I have a hard time imagining even someone like George W. Bush or his father or Mitt Romney or John McCain. I think John McCain would find that to be as nauseating as I do, and it's just not stately, not presidential, not appropriate, to say the very least. I think someone who has that sort of relishing cruelty on an official level like that, and the fact that people are cheering it on, I find to be probably as concerning as anything that I've ever seen in my entire adult life. And I'm a very careful person about how and when I weigh in on political matters like that, and am an annoying silver lining finder. And yet I think the threats of authoritarian virtues being celebrated and people not finding that universally disgusting and inappropriate to be as concerning as anything I've seen in my entire life. Do you agree that it is as concerning as I do, Grant? I'm fairly freaked out.
Oh, for sure. No, and it's very unfortunate we found ourselves in this situation, and it is challenging because we do live in this time of constant news and updates, and everything's breaking news, and everything's a crisis, and it's like we're in a poly crisis and all this stuff. And so it can be easy to feel like, well, is this just us being like overly dramatic? Are we just taking things too seriously and just everything's got to be the end of the world? But the attitude, that belief that's like that, means that when these things really do come along that are like true crises where things really are at stake, it's just too easy to write them off as, oh, that's just us being, hyperbolic. And so, yeah, I would agree that there's very scary things that will happen right now, and just the probability of how bad things could get being like way higher than it should be is terrifying. But yeah, I definitely on the ASMR deportation thing, it's like, look, you can and are allowed and should in the United States have your own perspective, your own thinking on what immigration policy should be based on your experiences, based on evidence, based on data, based on precedent, based on what other countries think and do. Like, okay, you can have that thought. But but we need to approach that debate and whatever we end up doing about it as adults, and to respect the dignity of human beings who are, either being denied access to the country, who are given asylum, who are deported, whatever. I mean, just basic respect, basic human dignity. And yeah, when those things aren't respected, it's unconscionable.
And I'm usually hanging out in nuance land, and I've read a lot of the histories of Timothy Snyder. You ever read his stuff? Do you like his stuff at all?
No.
Great histories of Eastern Europe. Bloodlands is a great book about just being caught between Stalin and Hitler. And Black Earth is a really interesting book about the Holocaust. And he wrote a lot about nationalism in Eastern Europe. But in recent years, he's focused much more on authoritarian trends around the world. Kind of like Anne Applebaum. She's great too. And also a Never Trump conservative that is at the Atlantic and has a number of very fascinating books. But them, and then someone like Madeleine Albright. And as we've talked about previously, I'm a very first principles oriented person. And democracy is challenging for first principles type people because it's always about compromise. You never quite get what you want if you're a first principles person in democracy. But reading these people, in the context has changed around me to the point now where I'm like, yeah, I do need to stand up for just the most basic level of decorum and democracy now. Whereas if you talked to me 3 months ago, I would have expressed an entirely different state of dissatisfaction that would have been much more in the nuance, slicing the tiniest little line where I feel comfortable with how I've characterized everyone. And the actions of the last month have been very radicalizing for me. It doesn't feel like the same country to me anymore. I'm not even speaking carefully. If you've listened to the show for any amount of time, I think the fact that I am speaking this way should tell you about how severely I view this.
Yeah, 100%. It is scary, and I think we should take it seriously because, yeah, it could affect the American experiment, which I think I like to think that many people of all political stripes have benefited from, an environment where we can and should, at least in many cases, or we should be allowed to, express our views and our perspectives and advocate for the things that we want to see. And if those things are at risk and under threat, it's scary times. And so I think we all have a duty. A phrase I read in a book recently, it was called Getting Big Things Done in Government, which I highly recommend if you, still work in government. And hey, I guess that proves I was a good civil servant because I was reading on my own time to try to, better my whatever. To better my work. But anyway, there was a line in there, democracy is not a spectator sport. And that stuck with me, and I think there unfortunately is maybe a lack of respect for things like civics education and for just doing the basic functions that we need to do to maintain our democracy. And it's just another one of those things where it's easy to take things for granted, to become complacent. But, we should take pride in things like voting or doing jury duty or researching a political candidate or speaking to your representative. And I will say that that's something I have, through working in government, I actually developed a much deeper appreciation for, was the importance of calling your representative, regardless of your political affiliation with them or not. But I actually do believe now pretty strongly that most politicians in Congress do really care about their constituents and fight for their constituents. And there truly are, in many cases, just split interests and incentives that cause some of the divisions that we see. But putting that aside, I think, before I started working in government, I was just like, oh, it's a nice thing to do to sign a petition or whatever, send an email, maybe give a few calls. I had only ever called my representatives to advocate for the Inflation Reduction Act. Hadn't really ever done it before, but now I've come to appreciate just how important that is and how just several phone calls, especially on like slightly less politicized issues, can really change the course of things. I mean, these like individual stories, people being willing to take time out of their day to contact their representative and share their story and their perspective. I mean, that's just so powerful. And so, yeah, I think that that's another type of thing that we all need to do to help protect our democracy is to get involved. And it sounds trite, but any of these kinds of things that, could even be considered as organizing, like it makes a difference and it helps sustain what, I hope we all respect as the American experiment. So
Oh, honestly, if you had said this to me even a couple months ago, it sounds Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, cheesy, naive, super basic, like boringly basic. Turns out that actually it is the fundament upon which all else rests, I guess, now. Grant, I want to take us back to your specific role, and I'm going to present you an opportunity to reveal me as naive, because I had expected the DAC hubs were relatively safe. If oil and gas companies spend any amount of money putting steel or concrete in the ground, I imagine they fight for it. And maybe they'll fight for it after the fact now with trying to claw back some of the money from the now frozen funds. But I thought that if you worked in direct air capture, you were relatively okay. It turns out, am I naive, essentially? Was I wrong?
Ross, you're never naive. You're always even keeled.
Let me have it, or you let it rip.
Yeah, I would say how I think about it is that there's a hierarchy of positions that different programs are in, and where you are, or I guess hierarchy is a strong word, maybe just like a chronology or just like different categories. And depending on what category you're in, that affects the risk of whether you're going to basically just get your money or not. I'd say that if the money has already been given to you, is already in your bank account, or you've already spent it, okay, you're probably safe. They're probably not going to claw it back. If you have been awarded the funding, and you've gotten like some of it, but you're awaiting like, oh, we got to review the results of your first budget period before we unlock more funding for you, okay, that increases the risk a little bit. I'd say if you've been awarded the funds, but nothing's been paid out yet, okay, that increases the risk a little bit further. If you've been selected for an award, but not awarded yet, which at DOE, there's an important difference between those. Like a lot of times projects will get selected, like you make this big announcement, hey, we were selected for $10 million, a cost share, this kind of thing. But it can take, up to a year, sometimes even longer, to actually negotiate the terms of that award before the funds can start flowing, before the work can start. So if you've been selected but not awarded, which there's a good number of companies in that and other projects in that category, okay, that increases the risk even further. If there's an active funding opportunity that has not made selections yet, it's just, there's companies applying, or you've already submitted your application, whatever, okay, then the risk is even higher. And then, basically it just keeps going. Like if Congress has appropriated the money, but no funding opportunity has been developed yet, okay, that raises the risk even more, and we'll have to see what happens pending, budget negotiations this year. If Congress has authorized the funds to be spent at some point, but has not specifically appropriated them, saying specifically this is, when and how they should be spent, okay, that raises the risk even further. And then the final kind of category here is, okay, the funds haven't been authorized yet, like we're just advocating for new policies to spend more money. Okay, I don't know if in this Congress you're gonna get that. Maybe someone's gonna slide something in somewhere, maybe people can make some deals, whatever. But I would say, yeah, like as you go along that spectrum from like the money is literally already in the pocket of the company doing it, already in the bank account of those doing it, all the way through, we're waiting for more funds to be approved, I'd say the risk, shoots up as you go down that line.
Don't oil and gas want to do this, or were they just playing along because they thought this is going to happen under Biden 1, potentially Biden 2, and they were just trying things out? I thought the convictions maybe ran deeper. We saw the Shell CEO recently came out for climate change and thinking that's a serious threat and is concerned about it. And everyone knows about Oxy's commitment to CDR and climate change broadly. Even if it isn't the exact formulation that they would like, they're actually leagues ahead of a lot of people who don't say anything or are actively critical of it. I thought there was like a more thoroughgoing concern. We're going to change this into energy companies rather than fossil fuel companies. We're going to run the system in reverse. All the cliches you've probably heard 150 times since starting in carbon removal. What happened to that? Was that all just window dressing?
You'll have to get them on the show and ask them.
Yeah, I don't want to put words in your mouth or force you to speak for them, but I thought they kind of thought this was a transition that was coming, and if there's money to help them transition, they'll take advantage of it. But it seems like the world has changed around them, and are they more okay with it? Actually, I am asking you to put words to their mouth, but maybe you can speculate. Are you willing to? I can skip this if not.
No, we can think about it. I mean, I think it's challenging. I think as many people will say with any kind of large, either individual corporation or set of corporations in an industry or something, it's not a monolith. And I think there are a lot of people, a huge number of people really, who work for oil, gas, and even coal companies who know climate change is a thing. They believe something should be done about it. And yeah, I think there are challenging, broader macro trends that prevent the transition, but we don't have to get into, talking about that. We can, it's challenging because I think a lot of, say, oil companies in particular, they are interested in getting into direct air capture. It could represent a new business line for them that helps them maybe transition some jobs in some areas where, even climate legislation aside, they might run out of oil and gas, but you still want to employ people in certain areas where the wells run dry. Well, carbon management, direct air capture, these are ways you can do that. And you don't even need to believe in climate change to understand that, well, if other people do and other people are willing to pay me for carbon removal and DAC credits, well, I can make money. So you don't even need to believe in climate or to go on about, or to bandy on about, oh, how bad, it's going to be in the IPCC and all this, to make money from doing something. So I do think there are overlapping skill sets. I do think there's interest. I do think there are existing investments that they don't just want to give up right now. But you also have to ask, if you were in their shoes, do you want to fight the Trump administration for a few $1 million for a DAC project? Do you want to potentially risk getting on their bad side, which could perhaps threaten other business lines that you have, or other kinds of projects or permits that you're seeking? It starts to be a calculation, and fundamentally, these companies, maybe in the future they're going to make more money from lower carbon business units, but right now, oil and gas keep their lights on. That's what pays the investors. That's what these companies do, and that's why there's kind of maybe a little, I don't want to say a fundamental disconnect, because I don't know, a lot of them are ideally, we would want to see them transition for the good of the climate, but it's just they're going to pick their battles, and I just don't know if things like DAC are going to really fall on the positive side of that. So we'll have to see, but I don't know, for some of these larger projects, particularly Project Cypress and the South Texas DAC Hub, these are substantial projects, and those projects were awarded, and there needs to be successful down selection, and it goes into that category I was talking about before about meeting all the objectives of your first budget period and kind of negotiating additional funding that isn't the highest risk possible thing, but there's still risk, whether those will actually go through or not. And so it's just to be seen, and I think that's just a theme of uncertainty that we all need to deal with.
Do you have a prediction for what will happen with the DAC hubs like Cypress or 45Q?
I think 45Q in its current state, and this is all, if I had to bet, or it'd be fun. We should probably do a thing where we get a bunch of people from across the car removal industry to put, do a super forecasting thing, and I'll put what probability do you think, this will be protected? I think 45Q is relatively safe. I think the American Petroleum Institute has even come out and said we're hoping to at least preserve 45Q. Because 45Q in its current way, if you dig into who's really making money from it, you see, it could stay in place. Now there's a chance it could be modified in some, new tax package or something. Is it impossible that they keep the point source capture stuff in and they edit out the DAC part of the credit? Ooh. I hope not. I hope I didn't just give someone that idea, but
they're not listening to this show. I think you're
yeah, probably not, or at least not this far into the episode. But I don't know, something like that could happen. In terms of the hubs, I think it's important to differentiate between the 21 hub projects from the first funding opportunity and this upcoming round. I would say and sincerely hope that the projects from the first round, because the vast majority of them have been awarded, that they'll be able to hopefully continue at some point. As for the second round, the funding opportunity is out. The deadline for concept papers and pre-applications had passed, but there's going to supposedly be this period where there's encourage or discourage notification sent to those who sent it in, and then the ones who are maybe encouraged or whatever submit full applications for that second round of the DAC Hubs funding. I would say that, just with that sort of typology I was talking about before, or different categories of different projects, there's just higher risk there. So I don't know if I would personally bet on those coming to fruition, but I sincerely hope that they do.
What's next for you, Grant?
I'm not sure. I guess I'm going to be a frequent guest on the Reversing Climate Change podcast.
You got to take over for me.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. I think it's prudent to take some time. I'm not sure if you are familiar with a website called 80,000 Hours, by any chance? Yeah. A fun, effective, altruist resource. But yeah, they're kind of high-level pitches. Well, if you're going to work for 40 years, 2,000 hours a year, your career is going to be 80,000 hours. So it makes sense to spend a few hundred hours as an upfront investment, thinking about the ideal way you want to spend your career to maximize. In their case, it's, positive altruistic impact on the world, but it can really be whatever you're trying to optimize for. So I do think it's prudent for, me to take a breath and see what's up. And then we'll go from there. But I certainly, love working in carbon removal. I love our community that we have. Sometimes I refrain from even calling it an industry. I still like to think of it as a community. Maybe that's naive, but
I love it too. It is. I'll let you do it.
Thank you. So yeah, I'll figure it out.
Thanks for being here, Grant. I appreciate you being able to share so openly your experience, and I know it's probably not the easiest thing to do, but I think it's important that you were on and were able to share as much as you did. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ross, for having me back on. It's always a pleasure chatting with you, and I know we were talking about some tough topics today, but hopefully there's some kind of hope, maybe some kind of optimism somewhere sprinkled throughout our conversation that people can take with them. But one way or another, I think we have to get to work.
I agree with that.